Hello, everyone, and welcome to this video of Men's Minds Matters. I am your host, Aaron Ryder, and as the title indicates, we are going to be talking about a very, very important issue, which is when is it time for a relationship to be over? And I work with a lot of both men and women who have a hard time knowing when it's time to call it quits. What makes it even harder is there are changes in our modern society that have changed the dynamics of some relationships that have muddied the waters a little bit of the way it maybe used to be. And that is not all bad, but it certainly makes it complicated in some ways. And so I want to discuss the things that I have seen that have been marriage enders. The other problem is everything on this list, I can almost guarantee you that you will find a couple who has, one of them has done one of these deal ending things, and they're still married. So how do they keep it together? And the reason for that is that every couple is different. So the advice that I'm giving today is not blanket advice. It is something that you should consider about when to end a relationship. So with that said, let me pull up my first reason. The first reason is, of course, infidelity or marital unfaithfulness. And again, this is one of those subjects that has led to changes over the years. And you may think, well, if they cheat, they cheat. That said, I know couples that have different relationship dynamics. In one case, I knew a couple that they were swingers, and that was okay for them to have a relationship outside of the marriage that they were in. And then, interestingly enough, one of the couples that I knew that were swingers, one of them got divorced. And the reason that they cited for divorce was marital unfaithfulness. And when I spoke with that person, I asked why. I thought you guys were swingers. I thought it was okay to step outside the marriage. And that person told me that there were rules to the way that they handled their relationships outside of the marriage, and that the other person had violated those rules, that they had not consulted them about who they were going to hook up with, and that to them was unfaithfulness because the commitment that they made to each other was broken. And it could be all kinds of other things. In another case, it was a couple where one of them had gone online and watched some videos, some pornography and things like that. And she said that didn't bother her very much. She could handle that. And there are probably a lot of women that could probably let that go. Not saying that you have to, but there are many women that would let that go. But it became for her unfaithfulness when he entered a chat room and he began an online correspondence with an actual woman who also had a family, and they began sexting with each other. And she felt that that was unfaithfulness. And you know what? She was right. She was worried that her fiancé was going to leave her and go be with this other woman that he had found online. So the best tool that I can give you, the best litmus test that I can give you is, if it is something that you have to lie about or hide from the person you're married to, it is likely going to fall very close to that line of marital unfaithfulness. And when they find out, they are likely to feel betrayed. So if you come close to that line, the best option is to back off and not do that. Otherwise, you'll be stepping in to what for your relationship would be unfaithfulness. Second reason is financial infidelity. And again, in our modern world, this has taken on some new forms and ideas. For example, I know many husbands and wives that even though they are married, they still keep separate accounts, and their paychecks each go to their own individual accounts. And then they make decisions about who pays for what, and there's a negotiation that goes along with that. And so not every couple has joint finances. The traditional example of this is if he went to their bank account, withdrew $10,000, took it to the racetrack, and blew it away. Yeah, that would be financial infidelity. He took money from their joint account to use something that he shouldn't have done. And she has every right to feel betrayed about that happening. So the important thing, again, is communication. There are some steps that you can take with financial infidelity to regain the trust in relationships. But again, If you are not being honest about where you are spending your money, if you are lying about things, you are hiding things, or you doing things that you know that your spouse would not like you to do, that is likely stepping on financial infidelity. And I know many cases where that has resulted in a relationship ultimately being terminated because the other person felt betrayed. They were saving to buy a house, they were saving to buy a car, and now because their partner went out and spent money on frivolous things, went on an online shopping binge and bought $1,000 or $2,000 worth of stuff, they had to put those plans on hold. And of course, for every couple, this is going to be different as well. Some couples have a minimum amount that they consult each other about, and that if they go over that, they're supposed to talk. And so that could also be a form of financial infidelity if they spend over that amount. And I do recommend that, by the way, even if you have separate finances or joint, the key thing is to talk about things and make major financial decisions together, but also leave room for smaller financial decisions. And then define where that line in the sand is so that you know that you're staying true to the other person. Next up on the list, we have abuse towards you and your child. This is probably one of the hardest ones because the way that physical abuse and domestic violence often happens in a relationship, it doesn't start with a hitting. It usually stops with a hitting. It starts with the control and the power that they want to change the dynamic of. And the other person often feels trapped in the relationship. That said, if there is physical abuse towards you or physical abuse towards a child, that is absolutely a reason that you could terminate a relationship and you would be justified in doing so. Are there couples that have survived domestic violence in a relationship? Absolutely. Are there couples that have survived child abuse in a relationship? Absolutely. But understand that your children are a huge responsibility that you have. And if there is a possibility that that child would be subjected to abuse again, you absolutely need to do your job as a parent and terminate a relationship where that child is being abused. So it is definitely a thing that will end a relationship. Like all other things, yeah, there's some chances it will survive and even become healthy over the long run. And that is with counseling and help and support. But understand that major changes have to happen if physical violence and domestic violence ends up in a relationship. It may very well be time to leave. Next up on the list, we have they are a narcissist. There are a lot of explanations for what a narcissist is. And there is no way that there are videos and books and things like that. There is no way that someone could be diagnosed with narcissism without actually being examined by a psychologist. That said, there are varying levels of narcissism, and when I'm mentioning narcissist in this context, we're talking about really the true blue narcissist, and the reason for that is that everyone in a relationship, um, in life, we are a little bit egocentric. We are often looking out for ourselves. That doesn't mean that we can't love other people. That doesn't mean we can't love our children and partner with people. But a narcissist can't. And the best definition I can think of is even though someone who is selfish loves themselves more than others, a narcissist loves themselves so much that they do not have room for another person. There is no one that they can love besides themselves. And if you are in a relationship with a person like that, it is very unlikely that your relationship will survive the long term because you can't be in a loving relationship with someone who cannot love you back because they only love themselves. So, in a relationship with a narcissist is definitely a reason to end a relationship. Next up on the list is that they refuse to get help for a serious problem. Generally, when we define serious problem, it is usually an addictive behavior, such as alcohol abuse, drug abuse, gambling, something to that effect. And that behavior on their part is tearing apart your family. So, what you would do in this situation is if you are in a relationship with someone who is abusing a substance or engaging in an abusive activity or an addictive activity, what you need to do is you need to have a very serious conversation with that person. And you often need to set a boundary, which will be another video that we're going to put up here in a few weeks. But you need to set a boundary or an ultimatum about what that behavior and how that behavior needs to change. In many cases, that would also include bringing in family and friends, not to make a group attack situation where they're all ganged up on one person, but rather to show them that we all care, we all love you, we all want you to get this fixed, but we have to understand that our relationship with you has to change if you don't get help. And if you are in a relationship with someone who refuses to get help for a serious problem, it is likely time to end that relationship. Next up on the list, we have refuse counseling. So, refusing counseling is really my catch-all of what's left. Because on top of the reasons, and let me put them up again, on top of infidelity, financial infidelity, abuse, narcissism, refuse to get help for a serious problem, there are many, many, many other things that can drive a relationship apart. In fact, most couples, long before things like infidelity happens, will mention that there were serious and systemic problems with their relationship before one of these big line crossing events even happened. And more often than not, you know that there's a problem. And your reason for going to counseling is not always to deal with a problem that happens, but rather to prevent a larger problem from happening. I have said this over and over to people. Do not go to counseling because it's like an ER. Go to counseling because it's like a well visit. You are doing what you need to do to improve your relationship. And the most common reasons, other than the big ones I've given, are things like lack of physical intimacy, lack of communication or poor communication or toxic communication, or just drifting apart. Those are all things that we will likely talk about in subsequent videos, how to deal with those. But in my opinion, most of those are fixable. I know a lot of relationships that have survived a lack of intimacy where they have figured things out and gotten back together and improved their relationship, or a lack of good communication. You can learn to communicate better. It is a skill like any other thing. But in order to do that, you need to have an environment where it can be talked about. And so when a person refuses to go to counseling, what they're saying is, I'm refusing to deal with this issue. And as we all know, if we don't deal with a small issue, it becomes a bigger issue over time, and it will likely lead to your relationship falling apart. So if a person refuses counseling, in my opinion, that is reason to consider getting a divorce or separating from that relationship because they are unwilling to work on problems that you see. One of the things that I talk about with many young couples before they get married, I always tell them, and I think I even put this in my marriage ceremony now when I'm giving my charge to the couple. One of the things that I say is, if you need it, if either one of you needs counseling, go to counseling. Because even if you are the person who doesn't think that you need counseling and the other person does, it is likely that that person is identifying a problem that you may not be seeing. And the only way that they can help you see it is by getting another person who is trained and experienced and helping to communicate what the problem is. Counseling does not mean that your relationship is falling apart. In fact, going to counseling means that your relationship is worth saving. So that is why I've listed that. And that is also why refusing to go to counseling could be a very good reason to end a relationship. So there they are one last time: infidelity, financial infidelity, abuse, narcissism, refusal to get help for a serious problem, or when all of those things are not involved but there's another problem, refusing to go to counseling. If any of those things are happening in your relationship, while it may not be a direct end right away, it is very likely that your relationship has serious problems, and without major adjustments to your relationship, these problems will continue and ultimately bring about the demise of your relationship in the long run. As I've said many times, addressing some problems will either lead to an improved relationship or end a relationship that might have deserved to or might have needed to end a long time ago. So go get help if you need it, but also don't tolerate some of these other behaviors like abuse and financial infidelity if you don't have to. So I hope that was helpful for you and gave you some advice. And if you feel like you are in a relationship that has any one of those things going on, even before you contact the lawyer and things like that, I highly recommend that you contact a counselor first. Because every situation is so different, it is going to be helpful for you to sit down with a licensed and qualified person to talk about your situation in detail. But in the end, in my experience, most of these relationships without a major change will ultimately end up demising, and you might as well know that ahead of time so that you know the decisions you need to make to protect yourself and your family in the event of one of these things happening. I hope that was helpful, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.